My name's Richard Betts. For those who don't know me, I'm the publisher at Real Asset Media, and we run around 60 or 70 of these events a year, looking at either hot topics, different sectors. So really interesting to have a great group of speakers here with us today. Welcome also for those who are first time for the RealX platform. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can ask questions, use comments, and the joy of this being live is that we will certainly try and answer all of those questions during the session. So we've got a tight hour today, but lots of really interesting discussion points to pick up. First of all, I'm going to come to Sabine Georgi from ULI. Sabine, I know that you've recently been doing some research along with IREBS, just looking at some of these issues around cities and repurposing and the purpose of cities going forward. Sabine is going to give us a brief kind of introductory presentation, and that's going to be a kind of jumping off point for the discussion, and then we'll pick that up. And I know that a couple of this is very fresh research, Sabine, isn't it? So I know a couple of the slides are still in German at the moment, but obviously we'll be able to translate those and pick them up. So over to you, Sabine, just for your kind of initial research thoughts on this.
Thank you, and thank you, Richard, to the opportunity to show a little bit about what we did with the IREBS University here in Germany. We thought it's maybe a good time to have a conversation about the pandemic and what's happened with the city. So here you see the right first slide. So we published a book. It's called The European Cities After Corona. This will be available in English soon as well. So this is a book about more than 200 pages long. So I only want to pick up the main key messages for you. I have to thank you to all the partners working with me on this project. These are our partners from ULI in Germany. So you found as well the big banks as well, housing companies and so on. So this gives also a good point of view what really happened in the industry, but also in the cities. The first key message is the citizens and the people live in the cities had the opportunity to order maybe the first time online, and they have to work from home. So the digitalization really changed the play for cities. We call it that this is really a change in the cost-benefit ratio. Why you live in a city, this was ridiculous or was changed a lot. So the cities have to find new answers why somebody should live in a city, because on the one hand side, you have advantages to live in a city. Maybe you can earn more money. But on the other side, you have, of course, traffic expenses and other things to cover. So the second key message is then we really proved also in one of the nice articles that is still an advantage of density of a city, and cities still make sense. We will all live out in the outskirts. We still want to live in the city because we still see advantage, and one advantage, and this is really maybe a good thought for the next discussions, is that we will have a bigger focus on social interaction, and this is especially important for the city of a city, that you have to have places where you can meet and to socialize. And all asset classes were, of course, had a big impact of pandemic, but with big differences. Bear with me that this slide is only in German, but on the first you see what happened to housing or resi, and you see in the column, on the first column it say the demand for the inner city and also for the surrounding of the city is really high. So we will have a bigger demand for housing still, and also not only about the flat itself, but also the place surrounded the flats or the buildings is more important. For hotels, we see, of course, a consolidation phase, but afterwards we and our people took part in this survey, told us that after a period of time, they would imagine that the hotels will have also another functions to fulfill, but maybe more mixed use also to include more of the mixed use topics. And for offices, is also true that we will see also more space in the buildings for come together and socialize. Because of the time, I will switch that because I want to move forward. This is also a thing, and there's no difference in the answers of the people doing that survey from Germany or from others. We did in European research, and there was no difference between European or other Europeans or Germans in this question. We will see that still cities will grow in the high and in the wide. So we don't. We will need even more space, maybe, especially for flats, because as I said, the demand for flats or resi will be higher because the people are now demanding bigger flats, because maybe they understood that they also need somewhere a place to work inside the flat from home. I will skip that we have enough time to discuss. And we will also see multi-use, and especially for the open space, I choose a nice photo for a marketplace. And you see maybe on one time this place is used as marketplace, another time maybe for theater and cultural things. And we saw that we have to give more thoughts about how we can use the open space in the city really to attract the city, that the people can come and socialize. So this is one of the main issues or the main things we found, that we have to use the open space more wisely and with multi-layers. So sorry, took a little time. So, and one thing, and this is also, of course, important for ULI, is that the cooperation between the public sector and the private sector is a really central challenge. And if we do it good and have a good dialogue and a good idea how to work on that, this would be good for both sides. And we think that this will be very important. And as I already mentioned before, we will see a bigger mixed use, not only in buildings, but also in the quarters. And this took me to the next slide. And Matthias, yeah, thank you. I have a problem now. That we maybe will see a city with more cities in itself, so polycentric cities where, for example, I live in Berlin. I would say we already are here. So the good quarters in Berlin, where you maybe know Prenzlauer Berg or Charlottenburg, these are still working and were still lively places to go, even in Corona times, where we have already good mixed use and have these places to meet, and not all the people have to come to the city center. So this is maybe hard to discuss. What does it really mean then for the city center, and what could we do here? And this is one of the challenges. And maybe one thing we also find out was maybe we should adopt the idea from the internet that city networks could help, really like the internet, and to have a city network. This is maybe also more true for the big metropolitan areas where we maybe have the opportunity to work more on a network. And the next and the last one is that, of course, we would need smart, if we want to come up with a smart city, we also need really smart buildings, but also smart quarters and cities that in the end we can build this new idea about how to work with the city center and also with the quarter. So these are the main findings of the study, and hopefully you will be able to read the book afterwards. There are so many other interesting parts in it, but I thought this would be good as the open remarks to this discussion, Richard.
Great, thanks very much, Sabine. That's really interesting, I think. And I know that report is being translated and will be made available in English, won't it, at a later point? But really interesting to get that early kind of analysis from you from that. Really good session this morning. Lots of topics there to pick up from. We've got a great panel. So we've got Stuart Patrick, CBE, who's Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. We've got Herman Cook, who's Head of Research and Analytics at Ellandi. We've got Stephen Lewis, who's Managing Director of HFD Property Group. We've got JarekMorawski, who's Executive Director and for Strategy and Research at Grosvenor. And of course, Sabine, who's Managing Director of Germany, Austria and Switzerland for ULI Europe. Let's just start with a couple of brief introductions. So just maybe a minute on yourself and what you're doing. And let's start with you, Stuart, if we can.
Thanks very much, Richard, and good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, and as you might expect, we have been taking the role of a city centre in our city particularly seriously through the pandemic, and as a consequence of the impact of the pandemic on the operation of the city centre, which we've all seen, we asked the City Council in Glasgow, the local authority in local government, to work with us to set up a city centre task force, which we brought in our Scottish government and our UK government representatives to work with us, to work alongside us, to establish what we felt were some of the major issues in the short term, which are still with us. We're still doing the reopening, so in many respects it's quite difficult to tell what the consequences are because we still haven't fully got through the pandemic as yet. But equally to look at least making some scenario thoughts about what medium to long term repurposing could look like. And it's certainly very interesting to hear Sabine's comments about the role of mixed use and some of the changes to perhaps the experiential nature of the city centre economy as something which I suspect we were aware of before the pandemic, that were hitting us already, but that clearly have been accelerated as a consequence of the pandemic. And I'll stop at that, Richard.
Great. Lots of things there to drill down into, Stuart, as well during this discussion. Really interesting topics. Herman, just a brief introduction on yourself and Ellandi for those who don't know the company or you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard, for having me today in this very exciting session. Indeed, Herman Cook. I'm working since the beginning of this month as Head of Research at Ellandi. First, a few words about Ellandi, basically UK-based and also predominantly active in the United Kingdom, an active asset manager, investors. We are working on approximately 30 locations, and we are typically targeting those locations which we feel are challenged by the ongoing retail transformation and where we believe there is good opportunity for repurposing, mixed use, revitalization, etc. So in that sense, I listened to the presentation of Sabine with great interest, and I fully agree with what Stuart said before, Steve said before on let's say the accelerating function of COVID crisis so far.
Great, thanks very much, Herman. And over to you, Stephen, just an introduction of yourself and HFD.
So I'm Stephen Lewis. I run HFD's development arm. HFD are a full service property company, so we do everything from construction to owner investments. We manage. We have an IT business. We're egotistical maniacs. We do the lot. but that feeds into a lot of topics that Sabine has touched on, from smart buildings and smart cities. We're building Glasgow's largest single office just now, which for most might be slightly trepidatious given the COVID pandemic just come through, but that building's going well, which is an indication of where Glasgow is as a city and the strength of its demand, and no doubt we'll touch on some of those later on in the discussion.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stephen. And Jarek, over to you in terms of yourself and Grosvenor.
Thank you. So I'm working for Grosvenor, and I suppose everyone in the UK will know the company. Grosvenor obviously originated from the UK, and still our biggest holdings are there, especially in London. But we are also active internationally for many years now. Across the globe. So there's a lot of activities in Americas, there's an Asia arm, and then there's continental Europe, a part of Grosvenor that I'm with, and within Grosvenor Europe, I'm leading research and strategy. And the prime strategy, real estate strategy of Grosvenor is urban real estate. So obviously we are very interested in cities, and what is going now and what has been sort of a slow trend that has been accelerated by COVID before. These changes in cities, in their character, that's something we've been tracking on a strategic level for a while. So very interesting to hear this discussion as well.
Great, thanks very much. And Sabine, you didn't really mention the ULI during the discussion. So for those who don't know, maybe just a brief introduction of yourself and the ULI.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the executive director for the DACH region for ULI. ULI is the Urban Land Institute, and we are understood as a think tank for helping, sharing best practices, and our mission is really to help the transmission of our cities to the next level. So that's why we also do research in this field, and we are working really closely together with the real estate industry, and on the other side, really with the cities. And our remit is always the city and the quarters, and not only the building itself, but building the bridge between all of that. So
great, thanks very much. So really interesting panel here. We've got viewpoints both from continental Europe, broadly across that side. We've also got key viewpoints on the UK, and also then drilling down into the city level with Glasgow. And thanks very much to Anne Murray and Invest Glasgow also for suggesting this topic, and also introducing me to Stephen and Stuart. Really interesting to discuss these topics, I think. Let's just maybe start with you, Stephen, if we can. Just from your perspective, I'd be interested. I mean, the pandemic has obviously had a significant impact on city centres across Europe, but from your perspective there in Glasgow, do you see that as accelerating existing trends, creating new dynamics? I mean, how do you see that?
It's a good question. I think it varies from sector to sector. Ultimately, and predominantly, it is an acceleration of existing trends. I think we need to not jump too quickly to COVID has caused all these problems, and through COVID there will be some opportunities. From an office perspective, there is a flight to quality. It's been picked up on some of this. The demand for space is there, but it's there even more so for better quality spaces. Occupiers move to meet wellness agenda, sustainability agenda, and efficiency, and get their staff back together and collaborating, which ultimately is what city centres do. What is the purpose of the city centre? It's about bringing people together, whether that's commerce, for business to business, whether that's retail, business to consumer, or whether that's individuals socialising in leisure and retail. Retail's been impacted pretty significantly, given, and that was there before with the impact online, and that increased significantly. But through those, there are opportunities. Glasgow wants to double its residential population in the next 10 years, from 20 to 40,000. It's that flight to quality for offices moves that will free up some secondary grade B space, which may be appropriate for redevelopment and repurposing into residential. So as one sector moves through COVID acceleration that was there before, other sectors should be able to step in. Glasgow's recently announced an Enoch Centre, for instance, which Stuart's heavily involved in, is a large planning application to repurpose that large shopping centre in its entirety. Again, itself, touching on Sabine's earlier comments, mixed use with offices, hotel, residential, now creating a much more significant part of that retail space. So it's not all doom and gloom. We will come out the other side. We have effectively let the majority of 300,000 square feet during the pandemic, which, when you consider Glasgow's annual take-up, is about 550,000 square feet a year. That's pretty impressive for one building, but is indicative of Glasgow's strength as a location, its universities, its staff availability and others. But there has been an impact. Take-up is lower than it has been, but it will bounce back. In offices, retail has been impacted significantly, but we'll find other uses to populate that space.
That's really interesting, and I'll come back to you in a second, Stuart, as well on that repositioning of the shopping centre, because that's a really interesting topic. Jarek, I suppose, what are you seeing in terms of continental Europe? Are you seeing similar trends there that Stephen mentioned? What's your sense of that?
Yes, I think I can echo a lot of what has been said, what Sabine mentioned before. You know, that the city centre is predominantly a place to meet. It has been a place to work as well, but I think still the social function is the dominating one, and that there's no really strong reason for it to change. One sort of a bigger trend that we've seen in cities, but that's especially in these really big metropolis, so mega cities, were well, it has been becoming more and more polycentric. Well, I guess you can observe it in London, Paris, you know, more local places growing stronger. With smaller cities, that's not really necessary, where you have short commutes anyway. So that's not really such a big trend, and that is something that we have been focusing on for a while, even pre-COVID. COVID certainly boosted the trend where life became more local. But you know, the general trend is still there. I don't think there is you know, there is fundamental change to people's behavior, and you can see it right now when cities are slowly reopening. I haven't been to London in a while, but I've been to Paris last week, and the centre is buzzing. Like there's lots of people in there. You wouldn't say there's anything going on in terms of COVID. So you see this really big urge of people to go out and meet. So this function will stay. And the long-term question is certainly, as Sabine mentioned, you know, will the character of city centres change? Slightly, I suppose, yes, but then you know, cities always change.
And Herman, I could see that you were agreeing with some of that. It'd be interesting to get your perspective, from somebody who's worked, you know, on the continental European side for a long period of time, and particularly also in retail, but now looking more at this UK side.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I mean, obviously, when the COVID crisis started March last year, I think everybody, of course, was surprised. Nobody saw it coming. The shock was big, and obviously we saw that actually everybody remembers the pictures of London, Berlin, Paris, you know, Champs-Élysées, nobody on the street. Luckily enough, I mean, that's basically past tense. We have, of course, seen a lot of changes, particularly on the retail side. If you look to the UK, but also continental Europe, a massive shift to online. Online sales in the UK, let's say pre-COVID, around 20%, probably the highest share in the European markets, rising rapidly to over 25%. Well, that's a real game changer. We have, of course, heard all the stories about collection rates, retailers not able to pay their rents, all the problems we were facing. Now, basically, 1.5 years after, we see that actually how retail is performing, you know, it's more like a mixed bag. Supermarkets, grocery performing very strong. Whatever related to house, home improvement, leisure, sports, by the time basically people realized that actually salary was still coming, and people discovered they were actually saving more money because they couldn't go on holiday, you know, housing refurbishments, renovations, all that kind of stuff. So again, do it yourself, typical retail park tenants, etc., performing well. What, of course, we have to see is how the change in the high streets are going to be. Typically clothing, shoe and leather, etc., where basically the hit was the biggest. And I agree with what has been said before. You know, people will go back to old behavior, old patterns. But a possible game changer can be the whole discussion about remote working. What if, let's say, as society, we agree that on average we work basically, at least the office job, we work, let's say, two days a week from home. But how is that going to impact city centers? How is that going to impact office markets? How is that also going to impact behavior of people? What we have seen so far, and I like the concept mentioned before on polycentric, we see that very strong. Obviously, we saw the footfall collapse throughout the UK. But when we, let's say, compare local town centers and community centers on the one hand with the big city centers on the other hand, we see actually that a component of localism that became much stronger. And of course, if that remote working is there to stay, and we agree as society that remote working will be, let's say, part-time a reality, I can imagine also that the tendency to polycentrism will getting stronger as well. So I saw some first views from my side in that sense.
Great, thanks. Stuart, I wanted to come to you because that picks up a point. I saw a KPMG study recently suggesting that actually Scotland may be a beneficiary of this and Glasgow. But there would definitely be these kind of, we would expect kind of changes coming from that shift to at least part-time working from home. So it might be interesting just to pick up on your thoughts on that and also maybe pick up a little bit on that retail repurposing side as well. Oh, you're on mute at the moment, Stuart.
Apologies for that rookie error. Indeed, I think on the office front first, the feedback we've had from members throughout the pandemic has been, yeah, we understand that home working is a surprise that we can actually function as well as we can in the short term. And I think one of the questions that we'll still have to ask as we emerge from the pandemic is the extent to which home working actually does or doesn't affect productivity. We were getting very clear messages that it was fine if you were doing relatively routine tasks. As soon as you were into relatively complex tasks, complex project innovation, it became less effective to work online. Equally, concerns about youth progression. How do you transfer tacit knowledge on an online basis? So admittedly, the solution has become, yeah, we'll do two days at home, 3 days in the office, and we'll find ways of structuring that. But I sense a battle between chief executives and financial directors. I think financial directors are delighted at the idea of hybrid working. We can reduce our floor plate over time. It's not going to cost us as much to house somebody. And chief executives a little bit more concerned about what the long-term impact on the culture of the organisation actually is. Home working is not a great way of building an organisational culture. So I'm not sure yet. We're kind of commonly saying it's 2 days, 3 days, but I'm not sure yet that we are going to be absolutely certain that that's the way it works. The good side of that was, though, as KPMG is saying, that perhaps we can expect to see more employees in the same office because you can accommodate more as a result. You don't need the permission of group to hire an extra 100 folks if you don't need that floor space addition because you can work in a hybrid basis. So that's interesting for a city centre. That might help to compensate for a little degree on the reduction in footfall. On retail, it kind of feels like there's no surprise. We, as Herman was saying, we were ahead of the trend on online shopping in the UK. We already had forecasts from some of the major retailers that they were intending to reduce their floor space by about 30% over time. What we were anticipating, though, was a degree of concentration of retail in the primary retail centres. And I'm not so sure whether we can feel as confident about that in the future. Having said that, I think it is easier. We know from our own footfall surveys that it's easier to present a high experience moment in a city centre than it is to do it in a shopping mall in a suburban area. So the density, the variety, the character that's easier to do in a city centre. And so I think it's still possible to be quite optimistic about city centres on retail. And the one thing I would say about the UK anyway was that the fastest recovery after the pandemic was at weekends, as shoppers were coming back into city centres to shop. So a mixed bag of evidence, and perhaps, as I'm inclined to say at the moment, just a bit too early to tell how many of these trends will stick.
Good. And just coming to you, Sabine, from the research, I suppose you gave some indications there, but what's your view in terms of what makes a successful city centre? And obviously, I know that you mentioned the polycentric nature there and those kinds of things, and I'll come to you, Jarek, in a minute on that as well. But what are the key elements that kind of make up a successful city centre in your view?
So the what we heard from our research, from the people took part in the survey, but also we had in the book also we asked our scientists to come along and to publish their papers on that. We saw that there are three things. One is the open space, as I said, how you can use the open space for cultural things, the cultural or the use for cultural issues, as I said, this will be more important, and we already see a push, for example, in the city from the city of Frankfurt to the big new buildings to include in each building a space, an area for cultural things, for example, a theater or something like that, or a museum and all these things. So we will see also requests from the cities to the owners of the buildings to separate some space for that function. So, and the other one is, of course, hospitality, not only from hotels, but the people wants to get out of their places. They want to get out. They want to have nice food, nice restaurants, and all the kind of stuff. So this will be also really important to have a nice offerings there. So this is the second. And the third, if you think about cities you want to go to see abroad and where you want to go to walk, is how the first or the basement of the building look like. If the basements are always looks the same or even empty or something like that, this is something which the people, the pedestrians, don't like. So if think from your personal point of view, you only see the basement and maybe something from the first floor. And if this looks nice and there you have a nice mixture of restaurants, hotels, maybe also good co-working atmosphere and everything like that, this will be the thing where we have to work really strong on that. And maybe one point to add how you can do that, and as I already came up with the idea or the push from the city of Frankfurt and the request to the owner of the buildings, maybe we will need more discussions between the owner of the buildings to come up with the solution together. Who is taking the museum? Who is taking the floor for that function? That we really create something together, maybe similar as a shopping center, where also there's one party who create the whole offerings. This is maybe something we should discuss and look in the future, how we can came up with good solutions for the whole quarter, not only the best solution for every single building.
And Jarek, just that's interesting there, because that picks up also that discussion around what's happening with the connection between investors and cities to be able to refresh, renew, repurpose city centres, which also obviously has a positive social impact as well. So are you finding that sort of discussion is increasingly happening with cities, has been happening all along, but you haven't mentioned it? What's the situation there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something that has been happening all the way, and probably right now, we will see this kind of cooperations gaining importance. On the Grosvenor side, one prime example is probably Grosvenor's involvement in Liverpool with Liverpool One, the inner city scheme. But we also in continental Europe, we have some schemes in Sweden. So two particular ones is Herman and Lidingö. That's originally retail schemes, and you would call them shopping centers, but really, if you look closely, they are the centers of this sub-centers, if you can call them so, in this polycentric city. These are really important hubs, on the main metro station, where it's not just shopping, there's life going on around it, and the way we grow them goes this in more this way, right? So it's starting with the retail scheme, but we just opened 2 gyms there. 2 restaurants are opening shortly. There's a big initiative on innovation to open an innovation hub to create this kind of buzz around innovation, and that really works. So Lidingö, one of these schemes, has been exceptionally resilient during COVID. I mean, we haven't seen basically a major drop in sales or on footfall, and that is driven by this local character. So going back to the topic of city centers, there's the city center as a city center that you sort of think of central London, and then there's the sub centers that will play a bigger role, and that is something where investors need to work with local authorities, with municipalities to make this happen.
And Stephen, and everybody's been incredibly polite, which is great. But actually, if anybody has a view that they want to come in on that, please just do come in it. Don't wait for me to ask. But Stephen, I just wanted to pick up on your view on that. Also, because I know that you're developing city centre office there in Glasgow, and what does that mean? And are you looking at are you and are your tenants, I suppose, occupiers? Are they looking for the 15-minute city idea? Has it got to be mixed use? What's creating the demand, I suppose?
Good question, Richard. I think we've got to watch we don't take it down into too granular. I think ultimately cities are the best mixed-use development there ever is. A city by its very nature mixes residential, office, retail, leisure, and all the components we want in a city centre. And ultimately, the 15-minute or 20-minute neighbourhood, whatever number you want to get hung up on, is about the ability for us as individuals to satisfy all of those needs in one location. It doesn't make sense to bring that down to a building level, but I agree with Sabine at the activation of ground floor frontages. We forget that the ground floor of an office, 10% of it is the ground floor, but it's 90% of the frontage. So it's the bit that we see at a human scale as we walk past every day, which is why working collaboratively and through the Chamber and the City Centre Task Force in Glasgow, we've been looking at the property repurposing strategy and working up front to determine what uses we can put into those stalled either retail spaces or office spaces and ground floor which are not being used as the market rebounds through COVID, picking up those investor requirements and other occupier requirements about an active and pleasant city. But occupiers ultimately need to know within an office that they can get to restaurants, they can get to retail, they can get to their other business colleagues, but also the doctors and the dentist and the supermarket and all the other things within a short walk of their office space, and which is why city centres will remain the key focus as opposed to out of town, and why the CBD and that flight to quality I touched on earlier is not just about the quality of the building itself and the amenities it has, but its locational qualities, its proximity to all of those amenities. So yes, things happen inside the building. We've got a 150-metre running track and an 8,000 square foot terrace on our building, which is great. But ultimately, people have to get out and visit restaurants and other things. So location is really important, but it's about what does that location provide in terms of amenity and functionality.
And thanks for that, Stephen. And Stuart, from your point of view, obviously there's, as Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, you're representing all of those companies, both, you know, hotels as well as retail. So all of that element, really. I suppose, what are they saying to you? Are they saying that they're looking for a gradual change? Are they looking for more open space? Are they looking for a more kind of people focused? I suppose, what are you getting feedback in terms of your members?
I guess actually the very first thing they're talking about just now is skill shortages, but moving on from that, and of course that's the big surprise at the end of the pandemic. We weren't expecting that. So that means we're having to pay much more attention to what the skills pipeline demand expects of an employer. So to what extent are you therefore actually having to provide a greater flexibility in work-life balance? And to what extent are you providing an environment for folks to work in that is as good as it can be? And so I do tend to agree that a lot of the feedback about, as Stephen was saying, that flight to quality, and as Sabine was saying, that change to the basic nature of the workplace, we can expect. It does feel as if that's becoming a very common debate. Actually, one of the short to medium term issues, the empty shop units, I think behind those empty shop units is also worth remembering how many individual entrepreneurs are losing their businesses through this shake-up process. And I don't think we would have really anticipated pre-pandemic that public sector intervention would be needed in order to try and speed up change, in order to try and help recover that entrepreneurial baseload that we're losing. But I am actually thinking that we do need to intervene in certain parts of cities to ensure that they don't become trapped in that vicious cycle of decline as shop units and restaurant units become empty. So a little bit more intervention, I think, being asked of us by members than perhaps we would have expected for a city centre.
That's interesting. And Herman, obviously I can see you agreeing with that, but I'd also like to just pick up on that idea a little bit, and particularly look at I mean, Stuart mentioned there the social impact side, and obviously there's a growing focus on ESG more broadly, both from cities and occupiers and investors, but also increasingly on the social impact side. Do you see that as a key element going forward, Herman?
Absolutely. I think, you know, the social impact and basically the city centre as let's say a heart of a city, a heart of a town, local identity, for people a destination to meet and socialize. I see that very strong. When we look at, let's say, city centres, and when we look at life, I mean, most of the goods these days we can simply get online. So we don't have to travel to a shop anymore to get those goods. When we look at, let's say, office work, well, we may end up in a situation that we don't have to go to an office for work on daily basis anymore. What we cannot get, let's say, remote, what we cannot get through online is experience, is social interaction, is community building. And I think that's really going to be a key. So obviously mixed use, as already mentioned, I think by all of us is important. I like very much also what Sabine was saying on ground floor use. I think that's really a key strategy. But when you look also to sustainable urban development, sustainable urban structures, sustainable urban buildings, I always like the example of, let's say, the first modern shopping center. I think that was Country Club Plaza, built in Kansas City in the US, and it opened in 1928, I think, as a suburban shopping center. And how was it conceptualized? It was actually a kind of copycat of a town center with streets, with squares, with open spaces. There was a bell tower, etc., etc. Also with a mixture of function. It works very well till the day of today. And I think, also what Stuart was also saying about, coordination, about planning. The power for town centers and city centers is a cohesive strategy, is a look on how the city center actually should embed all those social functions for their community and make sure that, let's say, the built environment properly integrated, also in line, let's say, with philosophies like urban planner Jane Jacobs, the walkable city, accessible, pedestrian friendly, well integrated, and also flexible, because the world will change, functions will always change, etc. But the city and the buildings, they will stay.
Good. And Jarek, I just wanted to pick up with you a little bit on that. I mean, there was a mention there of some of the challenges from Herman and planning, I guess, there. How do you see that? Is that, I suppose, as an investor, is planning and working with cities one of the key kind of challenges really for you, particularly on repurposing, I guess, as well?
Yes, well, I suppose that's always been and will be an administrative process, put this way. But at the same time, the experience we have are generally positive. So I can come back again to this Swedish example where the cooperation is really very good. Just last week we had a big event focusing on the future of the center of the city in cooperation with the city. So we're really sort of on the same side here, and there is good understanding from the city that it is the case. And especially now with post-COVID challenges, I would expect that there will be a drive to accommodate to these changes at the risk of really losing tenants from the center. And what has been mentioned here, sort of once streets start getting looking a bit more deserted, that's a problem to everyone. So that is something that you always need to face, but I don't think this will be our main challenge. Maybe case by case. In long term, the bigger challenge I feel will be sort of understanding what people actually want from the city center, because we all what we have in mind, set over years and decades, is this picture of a mix of office life and retail. People go working, then lunchtime go grab something to eat, and then post work go shopping a little bit and go home. And that's sort of you feel this pattern is changing, and where it's heading, no one really knows. Well, maybe some people do, but they stay silent. And that is on our side. That will be the biggest challenge, understanding the nature of this change. So is it experience? That's right, and we all agree. Well, what kind of experience, right? Is this still the shopping experience? Is this eating out, or is it something else we haven't seen yet? So there will be a lot of innovations in this field, I'm pretty sure, over the coming years.
And Stuart, you mentioned there the repurposing of a shopping centre. Was that straightforward in terms of planning? I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail on the planning side, but has that also been, because of the link there that you mentioned, in terms of the connection with city centres and the planning between both local authorities, yourselves, and the national government, has that helped do those kinds of repositioning, repurposing in terms of the planning side?
A bit too early to say, I think. One of the challenges I think we're undoubtedly going to face, certainly in our city, is the extent to which firm planning policies change. To what extent is the investment that's been made in creating those policies and in delivering those policies, how long will it take for planners to decide that the changes that Jarek was talking about actually are happening? And actually, I've got a certain amount of sympathy for the planners in that regard. It's no easier for them to tell what's happening than it is for us. So for them to go rushing out and saying we're ripping up all our planning policies on the back of a pandemic, that we've never experienced, well, we certainly in our lifetimes have never experienced before, is a bit of an ask. So I do anticipate that it will be a bit more difficult for those responding quick to the challenges and making their bets on where behaviours are going. I'm sure we'll find that going through the planning processes will be challenging, because you are going to be almost inevitably taking on existing planning policies. It's a really difficult one, because I have sympathy on both sides.
I've just got a question in actually from Andrew McConnell. Thanks, Andrew, very much for that, which is, are we seeing much post-lockdown demand for residential in Glasgow city centre? And is this period likely to be a catalyst for getting more people living in the city centre? And that's interesting. That picks up a kind of broader point around residential. But Stephen, maybe picking up with you, or Stuart, just in terms of the Glasgow side, whoever wants to answer that. Is this going to be a catalyst for bringing more residential back into the city centre? Is that broadly positive? How do we see that?
The short answer is yes. Glasgow published its, and we're not involved in residential predominantly, and so it's not my sphere. But I'm aware of how it affects city centre. And Glasgow published its city centre living strategy. It must be about a year ago now, Stuart, I think. And as I mentioned earlier, that with a strategy to double the population in the city centre, and it can do that. One of the biggest challenges is there are lots of BTR consents, but not a lot of BTR developments happening, and that's a challenge for our council colleagues in planning, whether the demand is it in the right location, is it the right people bringing that forward. There was a pause, the kind of urbanisation and move from rural to urban from a residential bit paused during COVID. Going back to Sabine's point about insufficient space to work at home, gardens, outside space, but the demand for retail's there, and I think that for residential is there. Glasgow sales rates are significant. Trying to get a lawyer to progress a sale just now, trying to get a valuer out, trying to get the banks to get mortgages, and I know I'm selling some things, so it is tough, and that's just indicative of where the demand is, which is great. But ultimately, we need more people in the city centre, because it's the people in the city centre that will drive the demand for retail, it drives the demand for leisure, it drives the demand for everything else. So the more people we can put in the city centre, the better. It's how we get the housing mix to do that, and how the support services then fit around about it.
And I guess, Sabine, is that something that is being seen across Europe in terms of what you're seeing, and also the positive nature of that, of bringing people in, I guess also has an effect in terms of changing the demand pattern a little bit, that people are actually living in the city centres rather than just being there during the day and those kinds of things?
And then absolutely, and that's why I came up with the idea, or the example of Berlin, where you see the quarters which were built decades ago with mixed buildings from the beginnings, or with buildings which are very flexible. If you think about the really old building stock, you have a flat, but you can use this flat also as an office. You can use this flat also for light industrial, that for example, for other uses. So these buildings were built very flexible. The problem starts where we then start building city centers with a planning idea of a clear distinction between the uses in a center. So this was an idea of in the planning of a city in the, I would say, 1970s, where we all build everything car friendly, and we have really a city, or the use are really was not mixed, but we have areas to live, we have areas to work, we have areas where we see the retail, and this is a problem. And this is also, I think, we have to really have a dialogue with the city planning to overcome this idea and build, maybe as we built 100 years ago, where we really build with more density. And then this is really a problem. For example, in Germany, we even couldn't build the Prenzlauer Berg or Charlottenburg once again, we would need the double of the area to build that, because in our planning law the density is much lower now. And I think this is a thing also we have to overcome these ideas really with the city planners to understand that we have bring together the people in the center and also other uses in the city center. And this is the game changer for us. And we see this all in the study.
Great. There's around kind of 5 minutes left now. So if you've got any questions, do put those into the chat now, and I'll try to deal with those in the last 5 minutes. Just some quick things that I wanted to pick up, and of course anybody can pick these up. But I suppose, how do cities attract investment and incentivize redevelopment when you've got vacant properties in city centres, but particularly those that can no longer rely on retail? So I don't know if anybody has a view on that particularly.
Yeah, I suppose that is a really will be one of the big challenges of cities. What do you do with these obsolete properties? But then you know, maybe I'm simplifying a bit, but cities have always been changing. There's always been some obsolescence, and reinventing is part of the whole evolution of cities. So this will be just another step. I agree. We'll need to do something with it. Where retail doesn't work, there will be other schemes, but you're already seeing things happening, right? There's you know, part of it is it's a bit like reinventing shopping centers. That's a similar trend, right? Where you start putting in some experiential retail, maybe brands take over. Some of it becomes a sort of flexible working meeting space. So there's a lot of trends going on. But I'm really waiting to see what kind of innovative uses will start popping up. And I'm very confident that the market is very innovative in this sense. There will be crazy ideas that some of them will work, some not. Some of them will come through and dominate. And that's something that is, at least from our perspective, you know, we can make guesses, but it's really hard to predict. That is a very dynamic process, and we'll need to see what people actually want to see in the centres. And I'm not sure we're quite there. We're just out of the pandemic. We need to probably wait and see what sort of changes in preferences this will have caused.
I agree. A lot is happening. I think also the last years, obviously, in different countries, we have seen department stores closing. And looking, for instance, in the Netherlands, where there is already a strong ongoing tradition of converting multiple floor department stores. For instance, in Groningen, where elements of the university campus, which is located next door, are integrated in the building, but also office space, hotels, residential. When we look, for instance, at conversion of shopping centers, a lot is already happening in the United States, where basically standalone retail locations are extended, for instance, with residential functions, also office functions. But I fully agree with what Yannick said before. I mean, that's complex, and obviously location plays a role, accessibility, public transport plays a role, and it's typically here where probably interest of investors and planners are coming together. Also in terms of guidelines, how can you transform retail in other functions, and what kind of functions can you do to strengthen the synergy of the whole in that kind of buildings and locations?
Yeah, I've got a quick question come in from Marcia Slesh here. Marcia, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. And that's really looking at how big a factor is local regulation from local city governments and influence in the repurposing topic of city centres. From Marcia's point of view, in the Netherlands, it slows down city centre regeneration in quite a substantial way. Is that something that we're seeing across the board, or are some, I guess, some regulatory authorities more advanced in this and more flexible?
Well, there is always the tension between, on the one hand, being flexible and, of course, wanting to have a quick and efficient solution. And on the other hand, of course, the need for a solution which is also sustainable and in the interest of a city as a whole. I can imagine in many contexts, indeed, you know, urban planners can react relatively slow. At least what we see in many cases is that, you know, retail, repositioning retail in horizontal sense, changing the back area, or in vertical sense, changing several floors, is not often that easy. On the other hand, obviously, urban planners take, let's say, a long-term risk in this story, because if the project fails, then often the developer is gone, the investor is gone by that time, the urban planners stay. So it's really a coordination thing and a collaboration thing between different market actors, learning from each other, looking at references, what is happening elsewhere, to try to smoothen somehow this process. Because, as said by Yannick before, it's not easy, it's complex.
And is this, Stuart, is this something where it's absolutely key, I suppose, to have that overarching policy that everybody's working towards, rather than it being kind of short-termism?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that we are probably heading towards a recognition of change. I think the senior leadership of cities will probably be a wee bit further ahead in thinking that than their planning colleagues. And we'll have that dialogue to see if we can get agreement about the nature of that change. I do think that sometimes central governments can help with targeted interventions. I particularly liked in the UK the business premises renovation allowance that ran for 10 years from 2007 to 2017 and helped to speed up the change in redundant buildings for new uses. I think there may be scope for us to look at that again to help encourage local governments to look at what they need to do to support the transition that the market will take time to make.
And we're right up against our time here, so I've got one last question for everybody, which is in terms of, you can judge this as city centres more broadly, or your own city centre or town centre, wherever you are. But I suppose, what do you hope that the city centre will look and feel like, especially in 5 and then in 10 years' time? Let's start with you, Sabine.
I hope that we will still have, so my hometown is Berlin, so I still hope that we have lots of great sites which will also be seen by tourists in the end, and so that at least the really big picture wouldn't change so much. But I think this will be more fragmented in the use, that hopefully we won't see each city in Germany doesn't look like the same, because what we had now is the big really big retailers with the same kind of shops everywhere. I think this will be changing, and I think this will be good, and we will see, as Jarek and Herman said, we already seen really good new concepts floor, where, for example, there's a room where people let out to the big brands, where you have each month different brands showing their new products. So I'm a fan of this kind of picture, that we will see really different and a more curated area there.
Great, thank you. I will visit Berlin in 5 years and 10 years, and I'll judge Sabine and see. Stephen, just coming to you, what's your sense of that?
I guess very briefly, and keeping it quite generic, I think certainly for Glasgow, continue to be a European city, and by that I mean attractive to Europeans. Glasgow's a great events industry, from whether it's Commonwealth Games, European Championships and others, and I think that will continue. We've got a strong legacy in that, but that it remains vibrant and it thrives, and I think interspersed in all of that is sustainable. I think we'll see significantly less cars on the roads, and they will be electric, not diesel. And we'll see that through our cities, and we hope that COP26 will the Glasgow Agreement, which we hope is reached at COP26, will drive the sustainable development of cities. So a sustainable, thriving and vibrant Glasgow would be nice. Great, thank you. Jarek, what's your kind of thoughts?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't think the change will be massive. I think it's a slow process. So I would expect this move towards polycentric cities to continue. So these sub-centers to grow, to strengthen, and city centers like the central city centrals becoming a bit more focused on maybe experience and sort of the social side of it. What will probably change a bit of how people live in the city is this change in working patterns. I'm not a believer in working from home, but still, I think even one day would mean that there's less commuting going on, and there's a bit less pressure on the transport system. And in longer term, I'm pretty sure what has been already mentioned. Sustainability is a big topic. So we will see a big push in this direction. Green spaces, sort of a livable city, less emissions, less noise. So this will probably play a big role in how cities evolve.
Great, thanks, Jarek. And Herman, over to you for your take on this. You're on mute at the moment, Herman, I think.
Oh, sorry, I had to push the button.
Right.
I see indeed city centers, town centers, and neighborhood centers in that sense clearly as organisms, ever changing, ever growing. I think COVID has shown us how essential those center locations are. And what I hope, let's say, for the coming 5-10 years is that, investors, cities, city authorities, planners, users work together, have the dialogue, come up with a common strategy, common vision on how to repurpose, remix, basically maintain city centers which are pleasant to work, live, meet, shop, whatever we use a town center for.
Great, thanks. And last word to you, Stuart, on this. And absolutely very interesting, as Stephen mentioned there, that Glasgow is the host for COP26.
I'll let that settle in. Yep, that's going to have an impact on us for the long term, I hope. But I would answer the question by saying, on the one hand, I'd like to think that our city centres are the showrooms for authentic local culture, food, drink, just the experience you can't get anywhere else than that city. That, I think, is something that cities really have to exploit and develop as much as they can. But I'd equally like to think that our cities are the thriving centres of innovation, that we are absolutely packed with researchers and companies and customers all exploring what the artificial intelligence revolution is bringing to us over the next decade. For whilst we talk a lot about net zero and we talk a lot about ESG, we're not talking quite so much about the artificial intelligence revolution.
No, I think that's really interesting, and we didn't actually get a chance really to talk so much about the smart city agenda and innovation and those kinds of things that for certain will be a vital part, I think, of a thriving city going forward, and also part of that repurposing of city centres and finding a really social impactful use for those for certain. Thanks very much for your questions. Thank you very much for joining us. I note that we have people also from South Africa joining us, so thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Thank you to the speakers. Really interesting discussion. Lots more that we can discuss, I think, on this topic. And for certain, I'm looking forward to coming back to this and re-looking at it as we see some of these trends begin to bed more in, and we can begin to look further forward with confidence about which of these trends are going to be staying. Really interesting to discuss this. I'm looking forward to COP26 and being in Glasgow for that. In the meantime, the next sessions that we'll be running will be a full programme of events at Expo Real. So if you're in Munich, please do come and join us on the International Investors Lounge. If you're not able to be in Munich, we'll be live streaming those, so they'll be also available to everybody in the RealX auditorium. So just as you came in today, you can access those. Feel free to visit any of the virtual stands as part of RealX. And thanks very much for joining us. If you're watching this on demand, that's great. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, but all of the sessions that we run will be available on demand on our website and also within the RealX auditorium. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much again to the speakers, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was
Thanks.
a big pleasure.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice day all. Thank you.